And can you believe it's taken us this long to talk about generative AI? Here to share how to use it to stay ahead and avoid any pitfalls along the way from Skyword is the fabulous John Tawadros, or JT as he likes to be known, their Chief Revenue Officer. Welcome, JT. How are you?
Good, Jade. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well, thanks. It's been a fantastic day, and so great that you're here to round it off for us. JT, tell us a little bit about you and what do you do at Skyward?
Sure. I've been with Skyward for almost 4 years, and me and my team really help new brands sort of uncover what the potential is to engage with their audience even greater through content. I mean, everyone's already doing content. Let's make sure it's very, very impactful. Um,
Yeah, how can we do content better? All right, well, we all need a little bit of that. We're going to hand over to you in just a moment, JT, and you will know what I'm going to say, don't you? He will be taking your questions really, really soon. So do get those in. Anything about ChatGPT, generative AI, JT is your man. For now, though, JT, over to you.
Thanks, Jade. I mean, honestly, it's a pleasure to catch up and chat with everybody, especially about AI. And Jade, thanks for having me today. I'm going to apologize in advance, real quickly. Nursing a fever and strep. The good thing about having a virtual presentation is none of you have anything to worry about. But honestly, I mean, AI. I mean, why wouldn't I want to keep talking about AI? It's a phenomenon, and it's one that is literally could be the biggest innovation in our lifetime. But is it really? When you think about what's happened. I mean, cars, they've been driving themselves for years. When you talk about if you have enough money, you too could go to the moon. And virtual currency, it could be worth billions one day and virtually worthless the next. It's funny, even this past weekend, I was chatting with a friend face to face about fixing a faucet at home. And um, wouldn't you know it if the next day I'm online on YouTube, and sure enough, the first ad I saw was a plumbing advertisement. So technology is moving at a rapid pace, and it's scary at times, rightfully so. But why is AI met with anxiety, excitement? It's because it strikes a nerve. It competes with humans. It stimulates all sorts of emotions. It's actually, like anyone would expect, it's hard to be rational when you're emotional at the same time, if you're anything like me. Interestingly enough, we've been fascinated with AI for years, decades even. Like look at all the movies over the last couple of decades that have had some type of AI. Tech has been using AI in the background for many, many years. And you could only imagine what government does with AI in the background that we don't even have a clue about. So really, what's new? What's changed? It's pretty simple. It's just accessibility. I mean, it took the world by storm back in November of 22 when all of a sudden any one of us could actually catch up and use AI and play with it and get excited. So it's relatively simple. That's what changed. But I think it's important to sort of have some perspective, right? AI is great and it's top of mind for everyone, but I don't think we quite fully understand its impact. And what I'd like to do is sort of put it into context. If you look at the Goliaths of the internet over the past decades, you've got folks like Netflix, who took 2.5 years to reach 1 million users, and these are sort of milestones that businesses use as a measure of success, an indicator that things are going to be great. 1 million users, 100 million users, and a billion. And Netflix took 3.5 years, and Instagram came along and did it in two. The next milestone of 100 million years, Instagram was forging the way with 2.5 years, yet TikTok came around and did it in 9 months. It's pretty simple. We're adopting technologies at a rapid rate, not only tech, but also how we're consuming media. And so the question is, how does ChatGPT stack up to this? And I'm sure everyone's seen some of these stats. And it's impressive, right? 5 days to hit 1 million. It's, 4 months to hit 1 billion. Like, I don't believe we will ever see any other company meet these stats quicker. I mean, this is just insane. It's here, and it's just the beginning, really. So now what? What's the impact that and the role does AI have on content marketing? And I'm going to discuss this in detail. And I encourage anyone who's got any questions, because it's a pretty hot topic and lots of different perspectives. If you have any questions, just pop them into the chat, and Jade will help us facilitate during the Q&A. Before we get into AI, though, I'd like to ground us in two really fundamental questions. The first one is, what is content marketing? And if you indulge me in a quick second, I'm going to read what ChatGPT thinks content marketing is. Marketing strategy that involves creating and sharing valuable and relevant content to attract and engage a target audience. It focuses on providing information, entertainment, or education rather than direct promotion, with the goal of building trust, establishing credibility, and fostering long-term relationships. By consistently delivering valuable content, businesses aim to increase brand awareness, customer loyalty, and drive profitable customer actions. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty good shot at it. I mean, it actually talks to everything. And I would have taken a little bit of a different approach, and that is, it's content that your audience needs, that they find valuable, that they engage with. It creates a connection between your audience and your brand. It educates your users. It promotes products and services to your customers. It builds emotional connections to users. And there's probably a dozen more that we could all come up with. But there's one thing in common here, and there's a real strong theme, and that is it starts and stops with your audience, right? Your audience has to find it valuable. And so, that's where I'd like us to be grounded in sort of the first question of, does my audience love it, right? The second question is actually even simpler. You spend all this time creating this fantastic content, tons of resources, money, effort, and sometimes a lot of agony. And then what if they can't find it? What's the point then? I actually used to work with a good friend and colleague of mine back in the day. And this is, we're talking about back in 2000 when search was exploding and Google had just come on the map and everything like that. And, his analogy was, what if you spent all this time and money building the most creative billboard? I mean, it was so enticing and eye-catching, but then you placed it in the middle of the woods. What good would that be? So they're the two principles I'd like to keep in mind. And I think my slides went a little fast, but let's talk about really what does AI have to deliver and offer us. And there are a couple of that we should not rely on AI to help us. One is trustworthy and original content, right? It just makes up facts. It doesn't know whether what it's presenting to you is real or not. It doesn't cite sources, and it reinforces bias naturally, given it's coming from a context of information that already exists. And depending on how strong those biases are, that's where it's going to lean. And it lies. And I don't mean that to be sort of illful. It has the best intentions, but it's using information it already has. The next part is it really can't provide advice or expertise. The data is outdated. It's dependent on existing content, and it lacks critical human thinking. There's no empathy. There's no personal emotion. There's none of that human element that, some of us might think, well, that's great. It's very black and white, but not when you're writing content that needs to engage with an audience who, guess what, also has emotions and feelings. And so you've got to make sure there's a connection there. And these are nuances that really, really matter. It doesn't provide novel ideas or fresh POVs. Whatever it creates, honestly, will be a sea of sameness. And so, if three of us went and asked ChatGPT for the same question, we may get the same, we may get a little different versions of it. If we ask the same question, each of us 3 times, I bet you there's going to be a lot of overlap by what's presented. So how are you going to stand out as a brand if you're relying on ChatGPT? And then the last thing, or actually not even the last thing, the next thing is really, brand tone, voice, context, alignment to persona nuances. And I will admit, and we're going to I'm going to contradict this point a little later on, it will get there, but definitely not on your first or second try. It's very, very hard to get to that point where you can fully rely on it. I left the last two on a separate slide intentionally. One is because they're incredibly important. One is ownership, right? Your content is a company asset. Yet if you create content, whole cloth from ChatGPT, you don't own it. That's a ruling or some guidance that came out from the Copyright Office of the US. If you start with content that's yours, that you own, and then create extra material from that as a basis, you do own. But if you have AI create it, it's not yours. And then the next one, equally as alarming, really, is confidentiality. If you use AI from a public forum, like the public UI, whatever you put into that chat box, right, becomes automatically available as part of their data set for everybody else. So if you're trying to sort of repurpose, recalibrate, do something with some information you've created that nobody even knows about yet, too late. It's already in there. So that's something to be very, very cognizant of. So what all this really mean? It's pretty simple, actually. And that is, you must start with original content created by the brand. You just cannot rely on AI to start. Otherwise, you just get a whole lot of sameness. And quite honestly, think about that first question. There's a reason we want to ground ourselves in those two, right? Will my audience love it? If it's being created the same for everybody else as me, then what's different? How am I providing any value that's unique to my brand that I'm going to have my audience select me versus maybe my competitors? So where does that leave us? Really, what could we use AI for? What does it do really well? Really, it's simple. It helps us analyze material and make suggestions, right? It's good at expanding thoughts and providing ideas. It's a great starter, if you will. And more importantly, what I think it's really great at is summarizing and reformatting content. I know the slide's taking a little bit to populate there. I'm sorry about that. But it really is about, I could take a piece of material and I can convert it to maybe a infographic, a summary for email, a social tweet, or a posting for LinkedIn. It's really good at transformation, if you will. The next one is about suggesting media types, meaning, keep in mind, AI is still very much copy-based, but when you're talking about converted into an infographic or a video script, it becomes very specific to say, here are the steps of the infographic. Here is the imagery you should use, and here is the text you should overlay on the imagery. That saves an enormous amount of time. Again, assuming you're working from a good, rich original source. Even with video, it does the exact same thing, but now it gives you timestamps. It gives you overlays for the video. It gives you, again, the imagery you need to use. I mean, it really, really does accelerate that roadmap. I'm going to try and catch up here on slides. I know there's a little bit of a lag. Really, the summary of what AI is good for is pretty simple. It's great at starting ideas. It's great at, provoking thought. But more importantly, and I think this is where we sort of need to ground ourselves, is it allows transformation really, really easy. And think back to question number 2. How will my audience find it? So if all of a sudden I could take a rich piece of content and create it for 6 different channels, for 5 different personas, for 8 different verticals, all of a sudden I could scale my content very, very quickly and meet my audience where they are. And I'm no longer disrupting my audience. I'm there for them to engage the way they want to. And that's incredibly important. So when you think about the do's and don'ts of AI and what the brand's responsibility in each one of those, you get to meet and check. Question 1, audience loves it. And 2, they can find it. All right, bear with me. Excuse me while I just take a quick sip of water before my voice turns into a frog. I assumed that someone's trying to catch up on my slides. We're getting there. All right, so really let's talk about how to implement it. In the interest of time, I'm going to gloss over this a little bit, right? But we as marketers, we provide tremendous amount of value, right? That AI just cannot, right? We talked about that human element. So we should focus on strategy, a strategy that meets the objective and meets the audience needs, that it has to be rooted in data. We have to incorporate experts, right? That talk to the audience, understand who we're trying to convey this message to, who's the recipient, and how do they want to be sort of talked to, if you will. There's no point in having a cardiologist write about an illness that a patient wants to absorb. I mean, that's probably, that's talking to an MIT PhD. And then, of course, hopefully you have some tech as well that allows workflow efficiency and an ease to scale. But let's call this is what we're good at. This is what we bring to the table. I'm going to use this, keep that in mind as we talk about a healthcare example. Right? These could be potentially themes that are important in healthcare right now, right? Labor shortage and stuff, burnout, rising cost of care, data overload, just some examples. But when you start planning, you need to start thinking more than just the themes. You need to start thinking about a topic, a major topic. In this case, I'm using the rising cost of, I'm using data overload, but more importantly, the topic being healthcare data crisis. Very much like that billboards in the woods analogy, you've got to promote it, right? We must meet the audience where they are. So immediately I need to start thinking about, out of that one piece, what else could I have? I could have little subcomponents. I could have them in different formats to meet audiences in different areas. I could have, again, a collection that ladders up into that first rich original source. Additionally, I've got to keep in mind that I've got to promote it and I've got to personalize it. I've got to figure out how many different personas do I have? What channels do I need to be able to get into? And I may have regions I need to address that also have a unique nuance. And we consider this approach as one to many, right? Before we even start and put pen to paper, when we think about the topic, what is the collection of content that is going to make it far more substantive as a topic that's going to make us more of an authority around it and reach the audience that we want to, rather than just hope and pray that they come to our website and find it. So you can address obviously a lot of channels this way. It's also part of the adage of, you measure 3 times and cut once. But shocker, there's a problem here. I'm sure everyone's like, holy Moses. The approach is great. It addresses the first 2 questions. It provides valuable content that the audience loves. Check. When you have the collection, you're going to be able to make sure that the audience finds it. Check. But all of a sudden, one asset turns into 30 very, very easily. And that in itself is overwhelming and exhausting, not to mention time consuming and costly, and has a boatload of bottlenecks. This really is where AI enters. This is another depiction, but what I wanted to try and show is, think about us as marketers focused on that center, that rich content that we've really thought through. It's interesting. One of our partners used a term the other day that I absolutely love, and that is everything is intentional, meaning I'm going to focus on that middle part, and I'm going to think about all the things I want on the outside, but let's use AI to handle everything on the outside because I'm the one feeding it and guiding it. Spend your time where it matters. It's really that simple, and use AI to scale. I'm going to put a massive, massive caveat here, and that is an editorial process. I'm sure everybody has one, and it's great, and you've got to still apply that. Even though you're going to do that very, very well on the original source, you can't diminish its value on all the derivatives. Now, that process should be much, much easier, given you've already blessed that first piece. It's been approved, it's on point, on objective, and talks to your audience. Now, all these things should be very, very close to that, but it's still good to put it through an editorial process to make sure it's still aligned. But that should be much, much quicker. Going back to just the example of the healthcare, that means everything in those bottom 2 sectors is all driven by AI with the right prompts, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and human overview. I'll share a quick example of how this translates into reality, and that is, Abbott Laboratories has a division that really is focused on analyzing global events, real data, and trying to predict potential pandemics. And one of the topics that came up late last year, I think it was monkeypox. And so they wrote a very good, original, rich piece of content around monkeypox that served as the basis for a fair bit of testing and sort of to show what AI could do. And sure enough, we took that original source of content and we created an infographic just like that. Now, I say just like that It was easy to create a script, right? Here are the steps, here's the imagery, and here's the text. And of course, then you've got to go do the creative work associated with it. Equally impressive, we took that same original source and created a 1-minute video. And I say a 1-minute video, but it took us 48 hours to do. Now, I'm sure there are some very impressive creative shops out there, and maybe you have some fantastic internal resources that could do that. But within seconds, to be able to have, here are the timestamps, here's the imagery, here's the text overlay, and now really all you need is editorial production work to go get it done. 48 hours is very, very good, especially when you're talking about an enterprise level brand. To be able to do that, that's impressive. And I'll be the first to say, although I'm somewhat biased, it's fantastic. It's incredibly fantastic when you think about how it was generated. And if anyone's interested in it, by all means, JT at Skyword, just shoot me a note and I'll shoot you a link to the video. It's very, very cool. And of course, you could use it in video channels or any other channel. Like, it just becomes another asset that is very, very meaningful. Another example, social posts. Develop social posts that included hashtags and CTAs, newsletter, top line, TLDRs, as well as summaries, all sorts of things. And I can show you dozens and dozens of these applications. And quite honestly, it's limitless. It really comes down to one thing, and that is prompt engineering. And I don't know whether we've coined that term, but we realized it's an important factor now with AI. You need someone who can do all that transformation. Anyone who's played with it realizes it's very time consuming. And unless you're very methodical about capturing what works, what doesn't, for one sort of transformation versus another, for one persona versus another, you're going to keep recreating the wheel over and over again. But it's incredibly impressive when you think about the objective of AI: scale efficiently. I'm going to share with you a couple of things, right? I want to give you an example of a prompt for a pretty good reason. One is, you've created content that you've written. Your audience loves it. You want to create derivatives. It's going to meet your standards, and it's going to allow you to address question 1 and 2. But how do you get there, like, tactically? This is an example of a prompt to convert an article into 5 different LinkedIn posts. It seems pretty simple, create 5 link posts, each between 1 to 300 words, in the tone of a marketing professional, create interest in the following article, and you provide the source article. I'm just curious if you guys could just shoot in the chat just a quick, simple yes or no, if you think this would get you what you want first time. I'm going to pause, give you a second to do that while I just take a sip of water, if that's okay. While you're filling that in, it's actually interesting. We now actually have on staff prompt engineers. I don't know that I would ever foreseen myself saying that, or even that role. It's a role that blends analytical, tech, editorial, and creativity skills all in one, to be able to just really do those transformations, put them in a library and a database, and very easy then through an interface be able to select, I want this to become this, I want this to become this. I also wanted to factor in this persona in this region, and all of a sudden you can scale very, very quickly. So I'll show you what a prompt looks like now that actually does meet the needs. Believe it or not, and it's not intended for you to read this, but this is exhaustive. And it's an art. It's not a science. Like, you've got to keep trying and see whether it worked, and keep fine tuning until you get to a point that works. Mind you, this script here, by the way, doesn't even include the original source. So when you add that, this becomes incredibly long. This was an early script we used, and they've become far more complex since. And of course, as you could imagine, would require calibration. Now, I know what you're thinking. Holy crap. If it's going to take me this long to write the script, why not just write the LinkedIn posts? And you'd be absolutely right the first time. But then what happens when you got to do it second, third, 100th? It's going to be far easier, and you're going to be able to exponentially scale if you spend the time and investment in this sort of thing rather than doing it yourself all the time. I know we're coming to a close, so I just sort of want to wrap up things, and I appreciate your patience with me. At the end of the day, your time matters, and your value is irreplaceable, period. And so where you should focus your time is on original content. and leverage AI to scale, and making sure you got that editorial oversight across all of it. The solve is very simple. Your data source, it's yours, and therefore it's reliable. The ownership, you started with your content, which you already own because you wrote it. And even though it goes through AI, you still own it because you started with your source. So you don't have an ownership concern. The prompt library, it's yours, and you've literally built another business asset that is incredibly important and helps your marketing scale. The other part too is you regain confidence. Like you have no issue with trust because you've got a proven editorial process, pre and post API, AI, that should make life very, very easy. And technically, your approval time should go down. There's this parent-child relationship between the assets. You've already blessed the parent, so therefore the review process of all the derivatives should be much, much faster. And of course, speed. That's pretty obvious. I'm literally, and people will hate me for saying this, but you click a button and you get those outputs. They still obviously need to be reviewed. And if it has creative asset needs, that takes a little bit of time as well. And then investment. There's two ways here to look at investment. Your dollars that you invest today can go much further and increase the probability of meeting the objective. It's that simple. You can have so much scale with the same amount of resources and funding. Or alternatively, given the world we live in today, we all have budget constraints. And, given AI ability to help us scale, you can get a more meaningful program with available funds rather than always trying to get more and more and more. And lastly, confidentiality. It's preserved as long as you're using an API and there's not much to worry about. I know that was a lot. I'm going to pause for a second and love to turn it over to you, Jade, and tackle some Q&A.
Thanks so much, JT. So informative, and you packed an awful lot in there. I did want to share with you the responses to your little poll. The majority of people did say no, they didn't think that that prompt would be enough information. So clearly, some very informed people here. But I suppose that sheds light on just how important prompts are, and that perhaps doing this off our own back on ChatGPT isn't going to be enough to get us the content that we need. Would you say so?
Incredibly so. I mean, the amount of time that needs to get spent on prompt engineering or writing, incredibly important. And then more equally important is how do you store these and make them easily accessible for anyone to use. That's what's going to get it right. Otherwise, you're just going to have failure after failure, and you're going to lose confidence that AI can do really what it can do.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. And one more question for you. When it comes to using atomized content, is that optimized for search? Is that going to be okay to sort of put straight out there, or do we need to then apply SEO on top?
No, absolutely. That's part of the prompt engineering. Like every content obviously needs to consider search. I mean, that goes back to, is your audience going to find it? So again, it's all included in the prompt engineering to ensure here's what matters here and here. And again, if you're working out of a system that's a database driven, you already know that this original source is going after this audience who cares about maybe this set of keywords. And again, through selections, you can say always apply the keyword target to all these assets and these derivatives.
Amazing stuff. JT, thank you so much. We're just about out of time, but so grateful for that intense look at generative AI and all the capabilities available to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for everyone for listening and putting through it all.
Thank you. Take care of yourself. Speak soon.
Cheers.
Bye.